I sold 100% of the company. It was a full acquisition. I wasn't even looking for, this is something that my brother always said, is don't build a company to sell it. Build a great company and somebody will want to come along and buy it. And I think that's orthogonal to a lot of advice you'll hear. A lot of people are like, oh, you've got to do this, buy this, and everything else. And I think that's exactly the way it played out. We didn't go and look for the acquisition. We were pursued by sign-in, and that's what happened. Grow, just build a great company, and somebody will want to come along and buy it. I didn't want to just sell it. We were profitable, we're growing, we're doing great in the marketplace, and I didn't really have to sell.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and, of course, did it without big funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guest is Andy Alsop, the CEO and founder of The Receptionist, which you can imagine is something that shows up at the front desk of a school or a business or a manufacturer to do visitor management, to check in and let people know you're there and print badges and verify and be compliant and all of that on the iPad. He bought this business after years of being an entrepreneur as a little tiny MVP that had a few customers and built it into a sizable company of over 5,000 customers. And I've talked to Andy through the years, met him at a trade show last year as a great practical founder with a really interesting angle on really leaning into employees. He calls it employee supremacy. And his customers, with not just investors first, that we see so much of out there. It's a great practical founder story. He sold the company and just a few months ago, so it's still fresh, and he's going through it, and it's working. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, Andy. Good to see you again.
Great to be here, and good to see you again.
Well, if I remember correctly, I met you last year at the SaaS event in Austin. Did you walk up to me in the hallway and go, "Are you Greg Head, that practical founders guy?" And we had a chat. Is that how we got connected, or how did it go?
I think we did. I think we had interacted. I don't know if it was on LinkedIn or something like that before. And then
before, yeah.
I remember seeing your name tag, and I saw you talking to some people, and I went up to you and I said, "Hey, I'm Andy Alsop with The Receptionist." And I think you remembered who I was. So
we might have had a call before there. A lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn, and then we have brief calls and things like that. And we did that, 45-minute standing in the aisle kind of conversation there. You had some deep questions and all that. And invited you to join us with the other practical founders from my peer groups and other friends that night. And we had dinner. You were at the other table there. And then you popped up this year and said, "Hey, guess what? I sold my company." It was a little bit of a continuation of the conversation we had. So I'm excited to hear more about your story. It's a really interesting one about The Receptionist. So why don't you first tell us, what is The Receptionist? What kind of software is that? Who is it for? And then we'll start digging in.
yeah, well, when I started the company I actually didn't start the company. Somebody else started the company in 2013, and then I came along and ended up buying it. But back then, it was so novel that I would go up to people and I'd say, you can put an iPad at the front of your office and it can do a lot of the work of the receptionist. And they're like, "No way, that's impossible." Well, now today, it's almost the norm when you walk into an office.
Where's
That's
your
what it
iPad?
does. Yeah, and everybody knows it. So that's essentially what the company has done for 10 and a half years that I was the owner.
So what do we call this? Is this reception sign-in software or
It's VMS, Visitor Management Software.
visitor management for schools and offices and manufacturing and any place people show up and need to sign in, get a badge, let people know they're there, verify something, take a
Yep.
photo, all that kind of stuff, right? Which
Yeah,
and always has a simple front end, and a lot of people tried it, but that's what it was, visitor management?
that's what it was in the very, very beginning. Even the main way that people get their notification that somebody has come to the office is by SMS or Teams or Slack or something like that. But In the beginning, it was email. People were getting
Mm.
emails that somebody had come to the office, and that was just kind of the early days. So, like that, everything evolved. I mean, it's amazing what people are doing with it now, and what it integrates with, and how it helps with compliance. It really has evolved as an industry, and it's no longer just kind of a simple app that sits at your front of your office. It does so much more now.
Well, we'll dig into that because it looks simple when you press a button and put in your name and phone number and things like that, and things happen and stuff, but I know there's a lot behind that, and you built a sizable, business out of that. You sold the company, which officially closed a few months ago, but what can you say about the number of customers and the size of the company, revenues and employees and so forth, at this stage?
So at this stage, we have about 5,500 customers operating in about 8,000 locations. We're north of $7 million in annual recurring revenue,
Okay, and how many employees, roughly?
about 30 employees.
30 employees. So, what an amazing business. And you sold the company. What can you share about who you sold it to and what happened there?
So the company is called Sign In. Sign In has acquired other businesses as well. It started as Sign In, and then received a private equity investment or actually a growth equity investment from PSG.
Mm.
And then from that, they purchased Traction Guest, which is an enterprise visitor management system, Swiped On, and then they've acquired us as well. They also acquired some add-ons that were add-ons that would go with visitor management, things like room booking and other things like that.
So you could say your company, The Receptionist, was acquired by a private equity backed strategic, a platform company. They buy and add around that. And right? Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. Definitely on the growth equity side, I think there's a little bit of, well, there's actually a pretty important difference between
Yes,
pure play PE and
that's
growth
correct.
equity.
Right. Yeah. Well, we can get into that as well, right? PE is
Right.
the buyout guys and add debt and turn the screws, and growth equity is generally more beneficial. They see growth hopes. So organic growth, sell more customers, and inorganic growth, buy companies and add to that. And that just happened. So is there anything you could say about the exit? You grew this successful company. You're the founder. You're smiling on the other side of this, but what can you say about the exit?
Well, the main thing about the exit, and I think I went and spoke to a lot of other founders, and I know that this process can be a very difficult process, and one when
Hmm.
they get to the other side, they may not feel so good about. This one, I have to say, I felt really good about it. What I found is when I did my research, was a lot of the founders of the other companies that have been acquired stuck around. And to me, that really made a big difference for me.
In this
Uh,
PSG sign-in,
exactly, at
orbit.
sign-in. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, so I'm surrounded by some of the people I was competing against and who I had for many years been saying, "Oh, swiped on," there's Hadley Ford. And then now I've gotten to know him, and he is out of, and the company is out of New Zealand. And then Sign In itself, they were one of our
You bet.
competitors, so I've gotten to know them. So when I saw that, to me, I was said, "That's a good indicator that they're still around." Because 'Cause you'd think, and I think most people think as soon as an acquisition happens that they're gonna take over the company and say, "Andy, so nice to have you here for a little while, but it's okay, you can move on." That's not at all the case. They see the other founders as having years and years of visitor management experience. And why blow that off? Why not get them in and make them a part of the whole company? So that was something that I found really, that it said a lot. And in terms of the process, I have to say it was a great process. Look, due diligence, anybody who's been through due diligence, it is not, that part of the process is not fun. It's not easy. It's an evisceration. They want to look at every last document that you've had, and that's
Mhm.
to, make sure they're covering all of their liability. Take away the whole due diligence process, which I don't think anybody's ever really had a lot of fun with, and unpack it after that and realize that actually is a great process. Every one of the employees that I brought over to the company is still with the company now. and is contributing and is part of the new business. And that's all that institutional knowledge is all right there with the company, and they get the opportunity to make it a part of the company.
Well, that's amazing. You're talking the book here. You're, your new acquirers, and you're still smiling. And I think that's a part of the conversation we had in the hallway at that trade show, because you're very careful about your culture. Let's say you're almost a
Mhm.
culture freak, right? You've built a great business and you're doing amazing things for your customers and your employees as a mostly, bootstrap with a little help along the way, very practical founder. I think we talked about growth equity and what happens when you get real investors. And there's a spectrum of where you can land and the types of acquirers or investors or whatever there. There's a lot of horror stories. And so this, Andy, are you so far saying, that this isn't a horror story and it's really amazing when you build a creative culture and find a home for it?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact, as we've talked about, when I saw you at SaaS I actually was in the middle of the very beginning parts of the negotiation to sell the company.
Ah,
I hadn't actually at that point thought that I was going to sell the company. And so I'm going to you, Greg, and I'm saying, I'm thinking of going growth equity or maybe, selling the company. And there's some great things you told me. And I know they're the ones that you've said to other people, and that when you sell the company, you start to lose control.
yeah,
There's other people who are making the decisions. It
yeah.
changes the character of the company. What you thought was your company is really no longer your company. I have to say it had a lot of impact on what my next decision was after that. But I still was going back and forth between the two and which one I wanted to actually which road I was going to pursue.
So what's the alternative to selling the company? Just keep going?
Keep going, and growth equity was it. I
Oh,
knew that at that point we needed the industry had matured, and
mm,
there was definitely more pressure for us to develop more technology and more features, and we needed to keep up. And not only keep up, we wanted to stay ahead. And it was going to be really hard for us to do that without additional capital. So that's really where I was. I was at an inflection point of,
yeah.
I was thinking going into that conference, honestly. I in fact, met with a whole bunch of growth equity
Yeah, you're
investors while I
there.
was there,
Yeah.
and they had those little 5-minute, like, quick chats or whatever they are, maybe they're 10
Mhm.
minutes, and so I spoke to a lot of growth equity investors and got a lot of contact information and was exploring that really heavily.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. And at this point, Andy, you're still running the receptionist business, which is now part of Sign In, right? The family, right? You're still running this as an independent company, or is it part of the whole system now and it's
Well,
being integrated?
it is getting integrated,
Okay.
and the thing is that it's not like we were just sort of an add-on that we could just plug in and say, and then Sign In could say, "Here's this new piece we've got," right? This was now they've got a whole set of customers. They have 5,500 customers, but they're using our software. And so what we've done is built strategies on how we're going to take those customers and move them over and have them start using Sign In.
Really?
Because in a software business, really, you want to have one code base, one application, and
Right.
everything else. So that's what we're doing. We are doing it in a way that we want to make sure that two audiences have a great experience, and that's the employees, that they have a great experience moving over to Sign In, and then also that the customers have a good experience moving over to Sign In as well. We're really putting together, we've been doing a lot of work on this, and it's really a lot of front end labor to figure out, like, how do you move 5,500 customers from one platform to another. And the way you don't do it is tell them they've got to move over by April 1st.
Right.
You have to really help them move over, make sure that they have the right features and that they have a good experience. So that's a lot of what I'm doing. Right now, actually, I'm not the CEO any longer. So I
Uh-huh.
have a very specific role, and that is to help the customers and the employees move over. And then something we've talked about is I want to try to embed employee supremacy as
Uh-huh.
a cultural piece to the company.
Okay. Well, there might be a few skeptics out there that say, we were bought by this private equity owned company. We got a good price for it. All that special sauce we had with our employees and customers, they're going to move to a different product and, going to be integrated into this larger system. And so we'll dig into that. Like, how's it going so far, and what's your expectations? You considered it a very precious thing that you had built through over
Hmm.
time. The loyalty of your customers and the great product that you had, and your employee focus, which was not just we have good employees or we have mission, purpose, and values, or we have a why, or something like that. You're pretty specific about your employee supremacy, which you've been talking about here, which maybe is contrast to the private equity, shareholder supremacy, he has the gold, makes all the rules. Well, let's just talk about that because I think that's a very interesting prism for everything else you've built and done here. What is employee supremacy?
So employee supremacy is really at its root. If you make the employees feel trusted, safe, secure, and you give them the backup to do that, you give them good benefits, you really do feel you trust them, knowing that they know what is best for the customer. And you have to hire the right people. This doesn't work for just anybody who walks through the door. Well, when you do that, actually have extraordinary outcomes. You don't need to sit there and look over their shoulder to make sure they're doing the work or whatever. If they feel safe, secure, and trusted, they go out and do amazing things for the customers. And that's what I have found over the last, since I've been running the company under employee supremacy, which is the last 5 years or so. It kind of was born a little bit out of the pandemic. That really is really an operating model that I think made an enormous amount of difference because, again, they're just going out and doing whatever they can that is best for their customer. So that's really what employee supremacy at its root is all about.
Let's dig in one layer deeper there because there's a lot of, part of the practical founder story is you've maintained your independence. You don't have to turn the screws on your employees like what happens when you're a public company or private equity owned, is the story. You could lean in to your customers, not just paying them a gracious salary and extra benefits and ping pong tables and free lunches and things like that. Can you give us a concrete example of you know what the level is that in real life that matters to these people that most founders are not making those choices?
Well, I'll give you one, which is something we implemented, and it is a benefit, but I think it's a benefit that really shows you the trust you can have in your employees, and that was Fabric Days. So every other Friday, our employees get the day off. So every other Friday, they're able to go and do the things that they're going to have to do, and we all have to do, right?
Hmm.
We all have to go grocery shopping. We all have to, take the car in to have it fixed, or we have a child that needs to go in for, an appointment or something like that. What we did was give everybody every other Friday off, and we managed it. It was all managed within every department. We had to have 5 days of coverage every single week,
Hmm.
but we were able to go down to a lower staffing level on Fridays so that each person could take that time off. And this has become something that we've run this now for 4 years. So it's not something we tried, and we're just doing it in the last 6 months, and I'm telling you all about it. It's one thing we did. In the first year, we did what we called Summer Fridays, which everybody got every other
Yeah.
Friday off for the
Uh-huh.
summer. They loved it. The next year, we looked at it, we instituted it, and decided, you know what? It's not going to end at the end of the summer. We're going to keep going throughout the year. It is a benefit that I know a lot of people I talk to, and they say, "You got to be kidding me. You
Uh-huh.
give your employees every other Friday off?" And it is something that is a benefit that I think really helps with retention because
Hmm.
employees go to look for another job. They're not going to find that anywhere else. And it is something where we
Even though
just
you gave them a day off to go look for a job or something
yeah,
like yeah.
exactly. If they wanna use the day off to go
Yeah.
look for a job, go ahead,
Yeah.
That's what I say. And we have employees that have been with us for 8 and 9 years at this point. So, it is that type of thing, and this is just one of many things. We've done things with our health plan. We've done things with, other benefits. The other part is we trust our employees with information. So we had a full dashboard, and in that dashboard, it had everything: the cash we had in the bank, the amount of revenue, our expenses, our EBITDA, everything. And so we did operate as an open book company. It was inside the company network, basically, or the
Yeah.
virtual
Uh-huh.
network. You and I know
Yeah.
what our old network used to be like, but like our cloud-based network. And that gave our employees a feeling of, wow, they trust me with this information, you know? And I think we gave a good amount of information. The other part is you really have to keep everybody informed, and you have to keep everybody aligned on where you're going. You know, so every Wednesday morning for 15 minutes, we do what's called a stand up. And in that stand up, every member of the leadership team is going through what's going on in their department. So we just really kept everybody informed.
Yeah.
So there's so many different pieces to employee supremacy. It's not just about like, their pay. It's not just about their benefits. It's about how you treat them and how you trust them. Because I would hear so many stories, and I would hear from customers saying, I've never worked with a company like this before. Whether they come in and they had a support need or something like that, or they worked with our finance department or whatever. We treated people like humans, and it's worked so well. And that's what allowed us, in my opinion, to be able to develop a company or grow a company that had the value that we were able to sell it.
This podcast is sponsored by my friends at Lighter Capital. In the last 15 years, Lighter Capital has helped over 600 software and SaaS founders secure simple, non-dilutive financing to grow a little faster without giving up any precious equity to investors. I know the Lighter team well, and several Bootstrap founders they have helped have already shared their success stories on this podcast. Simple debt funding from Lighter Capital can range from $50,000 up to $10 million with straightforward terms, no personal guarantees, board seats, or covenants, and up to a 4-year payback period. Go to lightercapital.com, that's Lighther capital.com, to apply and get a quick pre-qualification. Then talk with their experienced team to create a practical funding plan to achieve your goals. Now back to our podcast. And you had great metrics. I mean, 30 employees and over 7 million in revenues and
Yep.
presumably some profitability. I don't know. Can you say were you a rule of 40, 50, 60 company?
We were getting around the rule of 30, to be
Okay,
honest.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of a couple things there. One is with the ownership mentality, meaning they see the books, they're the top end of it, and everybody feels like we're rowing the boat. The old phrase, there is no them, there is no they, right? They made me do it, or they did it, or like the employees versus or the VCs, everybody the they. But when, I'm sure it created a we culture, right? And an ownership like, if you have to do something, somebody's got to pull up the slack because it's in the numbers, right? We got to make the numbers, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
also,
amazing.
just to add on, what I made sure everybody had equity in the company. Which for the longest time, people are like, "Oh, that's great," and they had a Carta account and it says, "Hey, you just vested some more." And they'd be like, "Okay." Well, when it came down to it at the end, when everybody, when the exit happened, it meant that everybody participated. And that was exactly what I wanted to do,
Yay!
you
What a
know?
gift. Yeah, how
Yeah,
fun is that? I'm sure that was rewarding for you to be able to share that everybody won a prize with all of that.
absolutely.
Your brother, Stuart Alsop, old timers would remember as the old info world, and one of the early journalists and educators about the software industry. Literally had his newsletter. I remember it in the old days before it turned into a whole media game and all of that. He was part of that, but he turned into a venture capitalist as well. So I'm sure you had heard a lot of stories about venture capital from him and the ways to do it and not do it. Did you kinda have an opposing view to that? I wanna be a bootstrapper, I wanna have a different style of business, or I don't know. How did your conversations go with Stuart?
That's a great question because, as I think I told you too, my older brother Joe was also involved in the company as
Ah,
well,
right.
and so both Joe and Stuart were. And what was really interesting about this, and I love to share this story, is Stuart came from venture capital, and venture capital, in many cases, although I have to say, growth equity has really captured the idea of being good to your employees, and they recognize there's actual
Mm.
value that comes from it. But I do have to say that the venture capital world, and a lot of times they don't necessarily feel that way. So I got a little bit of an oppositional perspective from Stuart, And then Joe honestly broke, he was the founder and CEO and, started the company called Progress Software.
Which is a biggie.
That's a big
Yeah.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
he took it public in the '90s and grew it to a nice significant value. And I actually, it was so funny because he had written a letter to he had to write a letter for his shareholder kind of newsletter or whatever. He said, I had to think about how do I address this. And what he decided he would do is he addressed it to uh, dear employees, customers, and shareholders. And he
Mm.
intentionally did that because he didn't know what order he wanted to put it in. But he said he really wanted to focus on the employees. Same thing. So when we get together, it's, we're always talking about that. So I would think Joe and I are maybe were a little more aligned, and I don't know. Stuart may have been like, well, you really got to focus on the shareholders because he was on the shareholder side. But I think both of them now that I've actually taken a company, sold it, and then provided a return. I think that they have both said, I think there's something, you got
Yeah, there
something
might be
here,
something
Andy.
there, kid.
Right.
Yeah, I love it. Well, the other thing is practical founders know that there's a lot of leverage that isn't funding, meaning you can make a great product and then narrow in and get a lot of leverage, or have great marketing that gives you leverage that you don't have to spend money on. You can do more with less, there. AI is leverage now, but people are also great leverage. Great people can do great things when they're well organized and so forth. Did you feel like you got way more out of your employees into the business, not just like working longer hours or something, but did you feel like it was worth the investment?
100%.
Mm.
100%. The product was better, the service was better, the culture so that when people were coming to work virtually or whatever else, I'm actually talking to you from our Denver office here, and
Yeah.
people still come in. We don't I've never said, particularly after the pandemic, I've never said who needs to come into the office when. The office was almost full today.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is in a lot of days. People are coming, seeing each other. It kind of being in your home
Yeah.
gets old.
Yeah.
Some people like to work from home and they may not come in as much, but there's really a camaraderie amongst the employees. There's a real team mentality and there is a loyalty. And you
Well,
can't beat loyalty.
okay.
When people are just doing what's best for the company, not because I'm sitting over them saying this is what you have to do, but because they know that that's what they want to do for the company because the company has treated them well.
Well, I know you talk about that on your website, and there's a couple interviews you've done. Is this a book coming up here?
Might be.
Okay, great. Excellent. Well, because founders are thinking about it, and, so
Mhm.
I'll put some links to some of your deeper conversations about employee supremacy there. Is that this sensitivity to the people side of things, is that because you're in, like, a people experience business? Like, that iPad at the front counter is, I don't know, the first thing you see, the first impression of when you go to a company or a school or something like that? Or is it just a personal passion of yours that just makes real good sense?
It's a personal passion.
Okay.
In some of the other companies that I've worked with, I haven't worked for a lot of companies. I've pretty much worked for myself most of the time, and maybe not always myself. Maybe I'm the
Yeah, of
director
course.
of this and working in a small company. But I saw a lot of behavior in terms of how companies operated. And, I've seen it in the past. I've also seen it when you just read the news and stuff, if it's about Salesforce and, the PE firm coming in and, saying that they need to get rid of Salesforce Ranch or whatever. And,
Mhm.
and just making what I think are unnatural decisions that are clear. I mean, what happened with Southwest Airlines and, the Elliott Investment Group,
Yeah.
that I think that is a lot of what I saw as behavior. And when I saw that behavior, it was something that I found it very ugly. I
Eh,
didn't want to participate in it. And I kind of just felt like if somebody treats you right and they pay you well, they give you good benefits, they make you give you the information that you need and not try to create secrets and not try to create a whole bunch of drama, but let's just get it done. I've found that, over time, it was a theory, this whole thing of employee supremacy, a lot of it coming from Simon Sinek and things like that. And as I began to implement it, I saw a lot of people and a lot of our employees when, Fabric Days like I talked about, and we made that something that was
Why
a
do you call that
staple.
Fabric Days? What is that? What's with that?
Fabric are our core values, and in fact, you can see
Oh.
some of them right behind
Oh,
them.
I
One is
see. There
respectful,
we go. Way to
fun,
go. Yeah.
authentic, bold, respectful, innovative, collaborative are our values. So that's why we called it the Fabric Days.
There you
And,
go.
so when I saw some of those things taking hold and I saw that we were getting closer aligned and really always rowing in the same direction, I was like, I feel like I've got something here. And so it has been something, and I think when I did announce the fact that we had been acquired in January, I think there was a little bit of, oh, well, this is gonna change the game, and
Yeah.
I have to say, Sign-In has done a really good job of supporting us and, saying, "Last thing we wanna do is shock the system and go change a whole bunch of stuff, so let's keep on going with this with the receptionist team." So a lot
Yeah.
of that has stayed in place, so I really respect them for that.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. I can think of a few of the 43 founders in my Practical Founders peer groups who are very much like this and that would enjoy a conversation about all the ways you could lean into your employees to lean into your customers to make great things happen, right? Isn't that the ultimate game in leadership? You mentioned you didn't really have like corporate roles. You've always been an entrepreneur kind of person here. What is your background, Andy? You're not a first-time founder here, you spent 10 years on this one, but, what's your background?
Well, that could go on for a while, but no,
Yeah.
let's see, I'll give you the shorter version. Let's see, so when I was 21, I opened a restaurant, no restaurant experience, did it while I was still in college. Total disaster, total
And
disaster. Then I thought, "Hey, I've been in the restaurant business, I'll keep going with the restaurant business." So that was the biggest company I worked for was a specialized restaurant, chain, and it was a cool chain, I loved it. Unfortunately, I think they've closed down since then. And then, I ended up changing into technology or moving back into technology after I realized and got beat up by the restaurant business, and
Mhm.
for all the restaurant founders out there, I have so much respect for you that you can
Right,
do
they've
it,
worked
and
harder for less is probably another way to
exactly,
say it, yeah.
and if you can run a profitable restaurant, I am like, "Man, I will bow before you."
Yeah, yeah.
So, after that, I actually moved out to Santa Fe, New Mexico,
Yeah.
and started a business with my brother. That went sort of okay, and then I built another business, and really, I've been in technology ever since then. So for 20 years of my career, I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I didn't quite have the kind of success that I was looking for as a founder, and so then I moved my
Was
entrepreneurial
it
life to
software
Denver.
companies or
Yeah, I mean, it
agencies
was
or,
yeah, the first one in 1995, this was, an online, business called asianart.com, and this is when, you used to get your domain names from, I think it was Internet, and it was actually
Yeah,
an arm of the government, and you had to, like, fill out a whole application for it before it actually went over to the private market. So we started that. It was a website my brother and I started, and we were trying to sell it to people, and boy, in the late '90s, when you're trying to sell, to small businesses, they're like, "What are you talking about? I
yeah,
put my
right.
ad in the phone book. I don't I'm not putting it on this World Wide Web thing." Then I started a web development firm with a couple of folks.
Classic. Yeah.
It kinda went okay for a while, and then the
The
dot-com
restaurant business
bubble.
of tech.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The dot-com bubble burst, and that was like, "Okay, well, that sucked." So and then I went through a couple of other things that I
Yeah,
was involved in, and then
yeah.
I came to Denver, and I found this business, and I have to say I was, really lucky, although I worked really hard to find something that I
Were
wanted to
you
do
in
in
the
Denver.
position of like, "Okay, I've done a lot of things. I'm not gonna go work for somebody, right? I gotta find a better opportunity. The world's changing." Were you kinda scanning for what you could do when you ran into this? Or, I is that a little too intentional?
No, no, I mean, it's so funny because what ended up happening was I wanted to, I was just gonna my idea was come to Denver and find a job. And so I went around and I don't know how much networking,
Oh,
I don't know how
wow.
many cups of coffee I had with
Yes.
people because it was a new community, but I had some inroads into the community.
Yeah.
And so I ended up networking a lot. And then I just networked my way up to Boulder, Colorado to these two guys. And I thought I was going to get a job with them. And they said, we've got these two, apps that we're working on right now. One's called The Receptionist for iPad, And the other one's called Text Us, and it's a texting application. And they were kind of like, we're not really succeeding because we're trying to run two businesses. And I'm like, well, it doesn't sound like you have a job for me because you don't have enough money. And they were like, would you want to buy The Receptionist for iPad? And I was like, interesting. So I never even went looking for this whole thing. I
Okay.
ended up getting to it just basically by chance through a bunch of networking and
So it was
somebody
like an
recommended.
MVP kind of thing
Oh,
or
yeah.
something. Okay. Yes,
Yeah,
very
and it was
cool.
only serving, I think it was less than 200 locations, and, there were some of the locations in Boulder, so I went around and
Oh,
talked
so
to
it's
the
working.
people.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they said, "This thing's great." It doesn't work great, but, it works well enough that it does the job. I was like, "Okay, there's something here."
Can I ask how much you paid for this little thing?
I paid, let me see, how much did I pay? 250,
Okay, and
250K.
with 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears, you turned it into a significant enterprise, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's another way to do it, I guess, right? And the other founding team, did they, when they focused on the other thing, after selling you this app, did they have some success or not?
That's the cool s I love this story because, I took my app and I went with it and stuff, and they ended up going and continuing with Text Us, and they got, I think, 2 or 3 rounds of investment, and they grew it way faster. Of course, they had all this capital to do so, and we both they ended up selling earlier than we did. I don't know, what the split was or, how it actually worked out. I think economically it worked, out pretty good. And then I continued down the bootstrapping route. So it was two kind of companies that started in the same place, and both were ended up being successful, but on different paths.
Were you committed to bootstrapping just because you were an entrepreneur and have done a lot of things and services business and the rest, which isn't around a lot of funding? There was a fair bit of funding in and around Denver, but and in Boulder too, right? Brad Feld and everybody there and Foundry. But like, was it just your style or did you try raising VCs and it wasn't a fit? Or how
Well,
did you think about that?
that's the funny part. Well, first of all, Brad Feld was the reason that The Receptionist started. Brad Feld
Eh,
needed a little app for his office, and he said, "Yeah, I got an iPad. Why don't you just start an app and stuff, and give it to me for free, but I'll keep using it." And I just talked to him the other day, and
Oh, good.
he's like, he's really he's been great supporter of it,
Yeah.
but never invested in it. He's not like the VC that invested in it.
Yeah.
And I really thought I thought I was gonna do the venture capital route. I was
Yeah.
really looking at, like, I need to do the venture capital route. And I started
That's
really
what you do.
learning I started learning about bootstrapping. And I started seeing what was happening, and we would the way I started it was I never had a full-time or not I didn't have a full-time engineer in the beginning, and I didn't have a full-time salesperson. I was doing everything, through fractional people and just hiring
Mm.
contractors. But I knew as I continued to increase the ARR that I would have more money to be able to invest in bringing people on. So that's what I ended up doing is
Yeah.
I ended up converting those people or not converting. I went and hired people, and hired them, brought them in, and continued to build the business by bootstrapping it.
Yeah.
And there was a point at which, and I can't remember who it was, and I think it might have been my brother who said, "You know what? You don't need to get capital." This
Yeah.
is my brother who's a venture
Yeah.
capitalist.
Uh-huh.
And my other brother who had taken on venture capital and had grown, back in the 90s, a
Yeah.
different form of venture capital almost, and took his company public. And both of them were like, you don't need to. You just need to grow revenue.
Yeah.
Just self fund this thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was a little bit of a weight lifted off of me when I had my
Yeah.
brothers who I look up to and everything. And they said that I was like, you're right. I can do that. So that's what ended up happening.
That's amazing. And it's customer revenue, right? And you
Customer.
was one of, I mean, we all saw this, the Practical Founders, in the beginning of the cloud, that 20 to 2015 turn, and was all starting to happen. And everything got easier with AWS and frameworks and such out there. You could do a lot with a little, speaking of leverage. And you just kind of said, well, we got to do something that works. I could sell it. I can reach people. We can build the new features. And if you just measure, have a measured approach to them and do the best they can with like it'll grow. It'll start to grow.
Yep.
What was the angle there? Were you just the first visitor management system on a iPad that they had seen? You're the first one to walk in and go, "Hey, you need this," or were you differentiating already in a crowded market?
It wasn't that crowded in the beginning. I mean, the interesting thing was, even the ones, the acquisitions from Sign-In was one of them, Swiped On was one of them, Traction Guest was one of them, we were one of them, Envoy was one of them,
Yeah, they
Sign
raised
was one
funding.
of them.
Yeah.
It really wasn't a crowded field in the beginning because I don't think anybody really understood really there could be a market to this. And it wasn't until, 2021, 22, where we started to see it blow up where if you go to any of the sites like G2, all of a sudden, instead of there being 6 or 10 out there, there are like 20, 30, 40.
Uh,
And so there was definitely an increase in the number of them out there. The good part is when you're one of the early ones and you've been around for a while, and you've got
yeah.
a lot of customers, anybody that comes to your website is saying, "Is this company going to stick around? Can they do what we need to do? And are they going to be there when we need them?" Especially when it comes to something like greeting your visitors, keeping track of who's coming in and out of a facility. So I think we had a lot of momentum. We were one of the early starts, and
Yeah.
we had some really good marketing, and we had a really good model. We were ferocious about getting customers. If they came in and they started a free trial or they had any sort of inquiry, we were right on it because that kind of decision can be made really quickly.
Yes.
And so it doesn't
Pop, pop,
necessarily
pop. Yeah.
start,
Mhm.
yeah, doesn't start out as, you're not going out to, whatever it is, a giant company and saying, we want all of your locations. We took a different approach. If we got one location from a Fortune 500 company, we would work hard. I'm like,
That was a
we
lead.
get number two,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? Can we get to number three? And then before you know it, there's some of the customers we have that we have over 100 locations using our software. And so I felt like that was a really good way to organically build the business.
So it was kind of that I'm gonna ask about your, go-to-market strategy. It wasn't start at the enterprise or a specific vertical, education that had unique needs. You were the easiest, fastest, most friendly one that people could hear about with good reviews on all the rating sites and good SEO and content and a try it before you buy it experience and happy people who followed up and right, to that kind of thing. Is that a fair statement?
It's a fair statement. We
Yeah.
also followed the customers in terms of what they said they needed and how they needed it. We have been and always been very customer focused.
Let's
So,
talk about that. Like,
yeah.
okay, you're selling it to a horizontal, it's a use case within different kinds of industries. Different industries have different security requirements and all kinds of things. Did you get to some common themes faster than your competitors would hear the same things? Or because it's easy to imagine, like, okay, there's 100 requests, or 1,000 requests for different things. When you listen to customers, how did you sort that out in this broad market?
Well, I think what we did, this is the way I think we
Yeah.
succeeded with it, was we would listen to the customer and we'd build something on an MVP level if it was a feature or whatever else. I think what happens is a lot of companies get focused on, I've got to build out this feature. So it's got all this functionality and it's got every little bell and
Mhm.
whistle. We would just build the very basic portion of that feature and then put it out to the marketplace and see how did they
Like,
like it.
literally ship it in the product and say, "Hey, try this thing," or is that
Exactly. A
okay?
lot of times it'll be we would keep track of the customers who asked for something,
Uh-huh.
and say, "Okay, these 30 customers all asked for this." So we'd send it out to them and say, "What do you think?" And they'd be like, not quite, I need it to do this or whatever." And I think that really helped us hone in on the right functionality for that feature. And then when we released it to a broader audience, it would be received well.
Okay. Wow. Did you have an app that tracked requests and ranked requests and keep track
Mhm.
of who did it? What app did you use for that? You
Well, we
remember?
didn't actually no, we
Okay.
didn't what kind of homegrown app. I
Okay,
mean,
there you
we
go.
kinda
Yeah,
keep
we go.
track
We're
of that.
we're coming back to homegrown with everybody creating things with AI and on all of that too as well. So you got this going, and what did it feel like when you got it up and running? You said, "Okay, this is a real thing." I'm sure it was a lot of peddling and so forth. Was it like about a million ARR? People have the epiphany that, "Hey, this is going to be a real thing. We're probably not going to go backwards." Right at this point, what point did you feel like it was a sustainable go forward business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say and this is the thing is there were 2 chapters to our business, and that
Mm,
was pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, right? That's a big marker for a lot
yes,
of companies. Sometimes the
shut down.
pandemic was really good to you, like Zoom, or whatever, and all of a sudden you take off. I would say that visitor management was not.
Hmm.
because you don't have as many people coming to the office anymore. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden the company is saying, well, we just shut that office. Do we need this little, system that we have? And that's why we ended up going into manufacturing. But to answer your
Ah,
question, I think when we reached $1 million in ARR, that definitely was a kind of a crossing point where I felt like things were going well. That's the point at which we had, more full-time employees. I mean, we weren't huge at that point. We might have been like five or six people. We didn't have a lot of capital, so it wasn't like we could just blow
yeah.
it up at that point. So the other part which was interesting to me is that in all the businesses that I had run in the past, I had never really had investors pursuing us. And it was like when we got to that million mark, it was
Right, of
weird.
course, yeah.
They're all starting
They
to
can
come.
smell the flywheel.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And they're
Yeah.
seeing the industry, they're seeing everything else. And they started coming out of the woodwork. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, I've got investors who are interested, as opposed to the way I used to do it or had to do it, which was
Egg.
beg. Yeah, go to the investor. Come on, talk to me. And so I think that was a kind of a big turning point. We were growing like weed through the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and that was tough. I mean, our competitors like Envoy had to cut their staff in half, I think it was, and they had to get a new round of capital, and that happened with a lot of them. So luckily, we didn't
So
have a lot of
Envoy
them.
was the big one for the
Yep,
big companies with the big funding, right? And,
yep,
kind of, you probably drafted off of some of their promotion and advertising, right? We do what Envoy does, except for little guys or something,
right.
like Salesforce or something, the Salesforce of the industry. But you never specialize? You said you kind of aimed towards manufacturing during COVID, because they kept going and needed to track people and things like that. But did you ever have a specialty? Was it small business, mid-sized business, you know, uh,
Well,
even bigger, or I don't know?
well, we focused, as you said, manufacturing was a huge focus for us. So in terms of the number of locations from manufacturing using our software, we really significantly increased that. The other thing is that before we actually created a manufacturing focused product called Recepful, I said to my team, I said, we need to figure out how to go after a particular sector and actually dive deep into a sector. So, one of them, and it mostly was just kind of chance, and we had looked at a couple of others. We looked at long term care, facilities for elderly, that kind of thing. And we looked at logistics, but then we ended up choosing behavioral health, therapy offices, stuff like
Yes.
that.
Uh-huh.
For some reason, they were coming to us and we were getting a lot of them. And so I said, let's figure out how to get and how to market to them and build the features that they want. We ended up building a really good practice in the behavioral health space. And it wasn't because we wanted to get rich off of, behavioral
Yeah,
health
you're
or grow
mining
huge
something that's
revenue.
working. Yeah.
Exactly. Figure out like what is the thing we need to do so that we can apply it when we take it out to manufacturing. So those are the two areas that we've really focused on is in behavioral health and manufacturing.
Well, it's a trick. Vertical founders on one side that say we just serve small dentists, right? They'll never go to chiropractors. They'll never go sideways. It's their focus, and there's a lot of beauty in that, the specificity and of everything, right? The whole solution, the language. Everybody goes to the same trade shows. But horizontal, right? Sell across industries. It, which was the first 20 years of software for the most part, really struggles when they start to try to narrow in and get a little deeper. It's just really difficult to go very deep. What did you do that was specific to behavioral health or manufacturing? Did you have different version, different marketing, different people answering the phone? How far
So
did you
for the
go?
thing we did with behavioral health is this is really cool. We got a couple of the influencers in the industry. There are 3 people, and I can't remember the names off the top of my head, and they're beautiful people. I was
Hmm.
just amazed, but they did podcasts, and they had published things, and they went on interviews, and by getting them to be the influencers and talk about us and do videos with us and stuff, that was incredible because the behavioral health industry really focuses on I take the lead from whoever the really successful people are in
Yes,
the
right.
industry. And we ended up getting one large behavioral health franchise practice that,
Oh, wow.
we have hundreds and hundreds of locations using our software right now. So that was something we did. We also developed a few specific features they need. And we also made sure that the technology worked in a way that they were comfortable working with. And
Yeah.
they don't want people people having to come in and type in first name, last name of their clients. So, they had different ways they wanted to do that. And then the main thing that they really needed was notification. Because the problem they're trying to solve is when people walk into the office, when their clients walk into the office, they don't want them coming and knocking on the door. So some people have a light switch outside their door to say whether
Yeah.
they're in or out or whatever. It's a problem for them. So the idea that they could come in and just type into an iPad, then that's going to send a message, and then the therapist, hears their phone go off, and they can say, "Okay, my next person here." It
Yeah.
solved a huge problem for them.
Wow.
And so, and sometimes you focus on it and say, we put up articles, we put up podcasts, we
Yeah.
put up things that made them feel like we were the experts in the industry and the place you go to. I could go choose the other ones, but none of these people are talking about it like they did. So we got a lot of cues from that. And then we actually use that in the manufacturing space as well.
Okay. Yeah, in the old days, the '90s, which we can both speak about. They have Jeff Moore in Crossing the Chasm, who I work with at Infusionsoft. He was on the board, but he called this the bowling pin strategy. Is you'd get an industry and you'd work on that industry for a while and get the momentum going, and then tip the bowling pin, the head bowling pin, into two more industries, and then like you kind of tipped over industries as you went, through the horizontal, segments, if you will. So
Yeah.
another way to do it. Okay, that's amazing. Well, COVID hit there, and you're still bootstrapping. Did you have any angel funding or any debt or any of that stuff?
No, we didn't have at that point, I don't think we even had any debt. The only thing we did do is we got the PPP loan.
Yeah. Hmm.
Thank goodness for the PPP loan. It really
Yeah.
helped us.
During
But I have to
COVID.
say, we never had to let go of one person, and I was really happy that we didn't have to.
Amazing.
And we didn't go into huge losses either. It was difficult, but when we got together and said, "What are we gonna do? We got this pandemic, not as many people are gonna want it." That's why somebody said, "Look, we get tons of manufacturing customers, why don't we just focus on them?" Why? Because they need to keep manufacturing, they have to stay in business. Oh, they need to
Who
do
said that? Was that like the CEO epiphany, right? That came back from hiking in the Colorado mountains, or was it a frontline employee or a sales guy, or what was like
I
who?
think I'm pretty sure it was one of our leadership team
Okay,
members,
great. Excellent.
and I think it might have even been Michael from marketing.
Oh, good.
Because
Excellent.
he knew which customers were coming in, and
Yes,
he knew,
of
like, what
course.
they needed and stuff. So I think I don't know, whoever might have said that is gonna listen to this and say, "No, that was me," but, you know? So I think that's really where, we came up with it, and then ended up deciding that if we focused on it, that could really help us. So, we didn't have to take any huge amount of debt. The PPP definitely helped us.
Yeah.
And then we got that other loan, and that came up 2 or 3 years later, and that was just like free money, so we went ahead with that anyhow.
What was that?
Um, it is the, disaster recovery, what's it called? Whatever it is. Basically, when they came out at the end of all of the money that was, awarded to the SBA to
Uh-huh.
be able to give out, they hadn't given it all out, so they went and they
So they were
started
donating
reducing the
around, yeah.
yeah, it was like it wasn't giveaway, you had to pay it
Okay,
back, but
okay.
it only had like a 1.75 or 2% interest rate or something, and
Yeah,
when I saw it, I was like, "Why not?"
yeah.
So, actually, we just paid that one back in January, so
Okay,
yeah.
amazing. Well, great. So, COVID hit, you, let's say, hunkered down, changed focus, for the time being, got through it. You didn't lay anybody off, and I guess were you employee supreme before that? Or employee
Apply
supremacy before
Supremacy?
that? Yeah,
Employee
and
Yeah.
this was a test?
No, it was what actually happened, I think it was in March, I believe it was, of 2020. And I was walking around my neighborhood, and I had just read Simon Sinek and listened to a bunch of his stuff. And they're the different parts of Simon Sinek's theories, of getting to why.
Yeah.
And the main one is like, what is your just cause?
Mhm.
And I'm sitting there walking around, and I can't remember the other four as well, but, it's like we got all of these other four elements of a business nailed, but it was basically, what is our just cause? And I couldn't figure it out. And so I was walking around and it was something that just came to me and I said, well, if we focused on our employees and the same thing, it was the original theory. If we focus on our employees, I know that we're going to have a really great group of people. And this is during the pandemic when things are kind of scary right now, anyhow. Let's just lean into the employees. So, like, during the pandemic, one of the
Mm.
first things we did was we eliminated all premiums for employees on their health plans on their individual basis, and we contributed more to the family. And when we did that, it was during the pandemic, and a lot of our employees are like, wow, I mean, I'm hearing people getting laid off and
Yeah.
everything else, and you're telling me you're going to give me more, you're going to give me more in my paycheck back? And I was like, yes. And so as a result of that, I was seeing
Yeah.
the snowball effect of what can happen with employee supremacy. And it really was connected a lot to the pandemic.
Wow. So the pandemic happened, some software went up and other software went down, travel went down, and all of this, and you found a way through it. Did you come out on the other side as a bigger company? Probably stronger, but were you continuing to grow?
Yeah, definitely. After that, the first, I would say 2021 was not a great growth year. I think we were almost,
Of course.
we never were flat. I'm so proud of the fact that
Oh, wow.
I think we had one or two quarters that we didn't grow. But for the most part, we were basically flat. And then we started to grow again. People started going back to the office. We had done really well in manufacturing. We were still out there and we had survived and we were, a strong company. And I think that we were able to continue forward. And yeah, we had some of our, early days, it's easy to be like, yes, we grew at 50%. Well, yeah, if you're at,
Yeah, huh?
500,000, you go to a million, that's going to be 50%. I don't think we hit those numbers, but we were still growing in 23, 24, and 25. We were growing really nicely.
Okay. And then you kinda had this inflection point saying, "Oh, should I sell it? Should I go faster?" And, selling the company, did you sell a majority of the company or all of the company? How did that end up, if you
Yeah,
can
I sold
speak to.
100% of the company. It was a full
Okay,
acquisition.
okay.
Yeah, and I wasn't even looking for, and this is something that my brother always said, is don't build a company to sell it. Build a great company and somebody will want to come along and buy it. And I
Yeah,
think that's orthogonal to a lot of advice you'll hear. A lot of
yeah,
people are like, oh, you've got to do this, buy this, and everything else. And I think that's exactly the way it played out. We didn't go and look for the acquisition. We were pursued by sign-in, and that's what happened. Grow up,
yeah.
just build a great company, and somebody will want to come along and buy it.
Well, they paid they bought the company, paid a nice price for it. I know you can't say, but what was it they valued the most? Was it the steady growth rate of, not really the product features since it'll eventually get, replaced there. What was great to them about your company that was worth buying and going through the effort to, add to the family?
I think number one is our customers. We had
Mm,
a great customer base. We've got customers in the enterprise space that, as I said, have
yeah,
hundreds of locations all the way down to, single location customers. And I think we had a really strong customer set. And I think that we had gotten on a growth rate that was attractive to them
mm.
and would be additive to their company.
Could you look at your customer metrics and say, our smallest customers churn the highest, our biggest customers churn the lowest, which is very typical there? And you had a manageable churn in this, right? It
We did.
wasn't a churn flu after all these years, even in an app like this, right, where there's a lot of competition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's two different well, I would say that our churn rate was very low. We were able to acquire customers and they would stay with us for a long time. We were very sticky.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that helps.
Uh-huh.
You don't want to, buy a leaky bucket.
That's amazing here. So back to PSG Equity on Sign In, right? And the CEO, Jeff Gordon, you and he have talks and, this feels like a good fit. We're waiting for the other shoe to drop, is the old saying, right? It sounds good and all of that, but what you're saying now, you know, few months in, I guess, how long has it been? That was since last spring, I guess. The conversations were starting in May. We met last year, but are there any surprises yet for your employees and customers? surprised there's an acquisition, surprised you'll be moving to a new platform, but are
I don't think
not
there's
a
too
death
many.
march.
What
Yeah,
what I do like about, and this is something I think is a testament to a good company, is that Jeff and everybody at the company has always been very forthright and communicating really well through the acquisition. And that said so much. So there were very little surprises, which I think that's a big problem that happens
huge.
in acquisitions. At the moment, everything that I would expect to have happened has happened. Our company, our employees are starting to become part of other teams and stuff like that.
Yeah, uh-huh.
If you don't think that's going to happen, that'd be a mystery. But it's been, I really can't say that there've been that many surprises.
Yeah,
There's been a few little ones here and there, but when you're trying to take 2 companies and bring them together, one that, has more than 200 employees and then bringing on one that has 30 employees, there'll be little shocks to the system. I don't think
yeah,
that anybody wouldn't have that, but nothing that I'm saying, "Oh my god,"
yeah.
or "I can't believe this happened," or whatever, so
Well, I've been through it a few times, and yes, I remember saying that, there, and also bringing people in, and being on the other side, trying to bring people in and defend the new regime, and oh gosh, it gets pretty interesting. So, how did you verify that this would be a good home? Not just the CEO acquiring CEO saying nice things and putting a nice offer in front of you, and making commitments. How did you double check?
yeah, I mean, I think I talked to a lot of other entrepreneurs who had sold their businesses, and I asked them about what are some of the surprises that they had, and what are some of experiences they had, and I got a lot of information for that. And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to go and take that over and see if I can find out, is that going to happen here at this company? And that's what I was able to verify. And this is my only, I've never had a company acquired at this point. This
Yeah.
is my
Uh-huh.
first one.
Mhm.
So I'm not speaking from like one of these people like, oh, I've sold 5 companies and this
Yeah.
is the best. So some people might, listen to this and say that doesn't way, that's not the way it
Got
happens. But
lucky. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, did I get lucky? I mean, honestly, the one thing I wanted to do is that when I met with Jeff, I wanted to vet out, is this actually what it's going to be? Because I didn't wanna just sell it. I mean, we're
Yeah.
profitable, we're
Yeah.
growing, we're doing great in the marketplace, and, like, it didn't really have to sell, and that is the best place to
That's
be,
the best.
And so for me, I was just like, "Okay, I'm gonna have conversations with people, whether they're founders that have already sold their businesses, and then go back and have conversations with the
Talk to
team and
people
really
they've
understand."
acquired and
Yeah.
verify. Okay.
That one for me is the best. I mean, I don't know how many times, and that's, very early on, that's what Jeff said. He said, "I can put you in touch with the other people who, other companies we've acquired and their CEOs are still with us." And I'm like, "Okay." And, that says a lot right
Yeah.
there. I don't know how many, acquirers would be able to do that. That gave me a lot of confidence, and I think that I didn't just say yes. It was a long process until
Yeah.
we got to an LOI. I wanna be damn sure. I also had 2 brothers who have been through a lot of this stuff already,
Ah, right.
and,
There you go. Little
I'm
advice,
getting a lot of advice from
late night
them and
calls.
hearing about the horror stories and things like that, so that really helped.
So what was, total acquisition price is one of the terms of an acquisition. What was another term that you wanted to make sure that you negotiated in the LOI and in the final agreement that, you know, was, almost as important as the amount they paid for it?
Okay, that's interesting because when I did talk to a lot of other entrepreneurs, they said things like, "We got retraded on the last day," you know, or "We got
Meaning they pulled
retraded."
the rug and said, "We found something, we can't pay you our original price, it's gonna be
Exactly.
20% lower, sorry."
In some
Right?
cases, it
Yeah.
sounded like it was really nasty stuff where, like, it wasn't even
Yes.
something and they're like, "Oh, we found this one thing, so I'm sorry, we're gonna give you half of what we said we were going to." And
Yep.
then you've gone through the due diligence process, and they're just playing the game. They're saying, like, "You've been through 90 or 120 days of exhaustion, you're just gonna say yes to get the money," right? And, luckily, a couple of the ones I talked to, they said, "No, we're not gonna do it." And they
Yeah.
went and found buyers that could actually,
I've had a few on the
succeed or,
podcast just like
get
that.
all the way
One from
through the.
Denver. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Michael McAllister. Yeah.
so there are a lot of other opportunities. So, I mean, in terms of
Did you say you're going to buy the whole thing and and I'm not going to stick around after a period? Another
It
one that a lot of founders dream about?
Yep, yep. That's the one that a lot of them said that as well. They were saying, I sold my baby, and then they ended up taking it, and they said, "You can go now." And they didn't actually expect that to happen. I didn't
Mhm.
feel like that was gonna be the case. So, I was looking for a lot of characteristics, and so what I decided before selling the LOI is that I wanted to make sure that I put as much into the LOI as I could
There we go. Right.
without so I spent a lot of time on the LOI. And there was a lot of, I think there's a lot of pressure when you get to that point. Private equity groups and growth equity, they're going to put a lot of pressure on getting you to sign that LOI as quickly as possible. And I kind of went back and I said, I'm not sure I really like this clause, or I don't have this, or I want to have this in there. I didn't put everything in there. I've talked to
Yeah.
other CEOs who were like, they negotiated the LOI for 6 months, but I got it to a point, and I knew that the thing I didn't wanna do was to have the deal retraded. And
Uh-huh.
so that's what I said. "What do I need to do to make sure this deal isn't retraded?"
Uh-huh.
And they couldn't guarantee anything on that. Nothing gets guaranteed in the
Uh-huh.
LOI. But they're like, "Here's some of the characteristics." And some companies, this is the one thing that I think is really important that I learned, and I'm glad I did. I was methodical and maniacal about running our books. No funky stuff in the
The whole
books.
time, not
Yeah,
just in
the
the end.
whole
Okay.
time since I started the business, and, I had some good voices over my shoulder with my brothers in there, but you just don't wanna do funky stuff and rent some condo that's for the weekend and put that on your books or whatever, is to really be sure that everything was clean, and that was the thing, and what I've heard about companies getting retraded is they find something ugly in the books, or they didn't disclose something, or the numbers don't add up. I also made sure that we brought in a fractional CFO firm pretty early on, because that is something that you
Which
really
firm
have
did
to.
you use?
I used a company called CFO Share. They're here in Denver,
Yeah.
great firm, worked with them for I think 7 years, maybe
Mhm.
6 years. They took us all the way through the acquisition.
They helped you
Our
with a lot of
books.
readiness, the
Yeah,
metrics,
a
answering the
lot of
question,
it.
all of
So
that.
then when we sent the books over for due diligence, they try, and they're gonna try to find anything they can. They're gonna come back with lists of questions. "What about this? What about that? What about this?" We were able to answer every single one of them.
Oh,
We
good.
had so that really helped, and I would, really, counsel any founder to do that, is to make
Yeah.
sure that you run the company really squeaky clean, because that's gonna help you get through the acquisition process much more painlessly.
Yes, we just had that exact term used in last week's episode with Sharon New. Says squeaky clean books. So like there's hitting us over the head there. Well, that's amazing, Andy. It's fun to have a call with you and meet you in person, and then to have you on the podcast sharing your success story and learning your unique approach to looks like kind of a commodity business and eventually a very crowded business, but you built a very sustainable company, did it in your own way because you wanted to, and found a good home for it. Lastly, what do you expect to do in a few years? Is this you get on to another entrepreneurial journey, after all this? After the transition?
Yeah. It's so close. I don't know if I can answer that
Yeah,
question
too
yet.
new. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
it's a little new.
Yeah.
I'm still, I'm excited. I work hard right now for what I'm doing. I'm
Yeah,
not
good for
running the
you.
company, as I said, anymore, but I have, I think I've created some great relationships in this company, and I think I have a lot to add. So that's what I'm doing. And there's a couple things I've thought about with the whole employee supremacy piece. You
Okay.
picked one of them out. I
Yeah,
wanna,
uh-huh.
maybe a book out there or something
Yeah.
else that'll go along with that. And I think it's hard not to be an entrepreneur if you've been an entrepreneur for a long time. So
Another way to say it's hard not to be. Yeah,
right.
I love it. That's exactly right. That's great. Well, good for you, and I know you'll do something, wonderful for the world at some point, whether it's a book or something else, and keep going there. Congratulations on all your adventures and your latest win as a practical founder with The Receptionist. So, we'll have links to your, talks about employee supremacy and such in the show notes as well. I really appreciate you being on the podcast, today, Andy, and, all the best in your finishing your transition.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun chatting about it.
Awesome. Thanks for watching this week's interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly in-depth interviews with serious software founders who are building valuable software companies without big funding. You can check out my blog, all the podcast episodes, and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com, or message me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. See you next week.